Imagine being English in the 1550s. Your last king, Henry VIII, broke with the Pope because he needed a divorce, creating his own special brand of Catholicism light. Then his sickly son, Edward VI, went full-on Protestant Reformation, stripping the churches bare and rewriting the prayer books. Then he dies. And up to the plate steps Mary I, Henry's first daughter, who is, to put it mildly, aggressively Catholic. She viewed the last 2 decades of religious experimentation with the enthusiasm of someone finding mold in their favorite jam. England was about to get a case of theological whiplash so severe it would make your head spin right off your shoulders. Mary didn't just start pointing at people and yelling, "Burn!" That would be inefficient, and the Tudors were nothing if not bureaucratic. No, her first parliament in 1553 got to work methodically undoing everything her father and brother had done. The key move came in late 1554. They revived the old De Heretico Comburendo laws, a fancy Latin phrase which roughly translates to "on the burning of heretics." This wasn't some new radical idea, it was dusting off medieval legislation. It's a classic administrative move. Why invent new ways to punish people when the old ones worked perfectly fine? It was state-sanctioned, legally grounded religious purification. The first man to test out this newly reinstated policy was John Rogers, a biblical scholar and clergyman. His crime was essentially preaching that the brand of Christianity England had followed for the last 6 years was, in fact, correct. An awkward position to be in. In his trial, they grilled him on transubstantiation, the idea that the bread and wine literally become the body and blood of Christ. He didn't buy it. So, in February 1555, he was burned at the stake at Smithfield. He went to his death with unnerving calmness, apparently refusing a pardon that required him to recant. A terrible opening act for the horrors to come, and a spectacular failure if the goal was intimidation. Of course, you can't have a proper persecution without taking down some celebrities. Enter the Oxford Martyrs, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and the biggest name of all, Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had granted Henry VIII his divorce and masterminded the English Reformation. He was, to Mary, the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Latimer and Ridley were burned together in October 1555. Cranmer, however, was a special case. Under immense pressure, he broke, writing several recantations of his Protestant faith. But at the last minute, at his own execution, he dramatically renounced his recantations and thrust the hand that signed them into the fire first. A stunning piece of political theater that ensured his martyrdom, not his weakness, would be remembered. So, how bloody was Mary really? Over her reign of just under 5 years, around 283 Protestants were burned at the stake. Now, that's a horrifying number, but let's add some context. Her father, Henry VIII, executed somewhere between 57,000 and 72,000 people for various reasons. Her sister, Elizabeth I, would later execute thousands of Catholics. The difference was the method. Hanging is grim, beheading is messy, but burning? Burning is a spectacle. It's slow, it's public, and it's freighted with theological horror about hellfire. Mary didn't invent brutality, but she was a genius at branding it. The big-name bishops get all the attention, but they were only a tiny fraction of the victims. The vast majority were not theologians. They were weavers, blacksmiths, farmers, and a surprisingly large number of women, about 60 in total. These weren't people writing complex treatises. They were people who had internalized the New English Bible and the Book of Common Prayer. They were asked impossible questions in their heresy trials, tangled in theological knots by university-trained clerics. It was the equivalent of asking someone who enjoys watching movies to explain the finer points of cinematic theory, with the penalty for a wrong answer being set on fire. It was an unequal, terrifying fight. This wave of persecution wasn't spread evenly across England like some sort of terrible fiery butter. It was intensely concentrated. The vast majority of burnings took place in the southeast: London, Essex, Sussex, and Kent. Why there? Because that was the heartland of Protestantism, the most economically advanced and literate part of the country, with strong trade links to Protestant Europe. The Bishop of London, Edmund Bonner, became infamous for his zeal, earning the nickname Bloody Bonner. Meanwhile, in the more conservative and Catholic north of England, you could be a Protestant and likely get away with just keeping your head down. Your chance of being burned depended heavily on your postcode. Faced with the choice between their beliefs and a very public cremation, about 800 Protestants chose a third option: running away. These Marian exiles fled to the continent, setting up communities in places like Geneva, Zurich, and Frankfurt. This was a catastrophic long-term mistake for the Catholic cause. These weren't just random people, they were wealthy merchants, influential clergymen, and scholars. In exile, they were exposed to the much more radical, organized Calvinism of continental Europe. They spent their time writing furious anti-Mary propaganda and planning their return. They basically went away for a 5-year radicalization seminar, all courtesy of Mary's domestic policy. Mary's regime was brutal, but her historical reputation was cemented by one man, John Foxe. One of the exiles, Foxe meticulously collected stories of the martyrs. After Mary's death, he published them in a book titled Acts and Monuments, better known as Foxe's Book of Martyrs. It was a masterpiece of propaganda. It had compelling stories, heroic defiance, and gruesome woodcut illustrations of every burning. It became a massive bestseller, placed in churches across England by order of Queen Elizabeth's government. For centuries, this book defined Mary's reign. She provided the horror, but Foxe wrote the script that would play for the next 400 years. So, did any of this actually work? Not even a little bit. In fact, it backfired spectacularly. The goal was to scare England back into the Catholic fold. The result was creating a generation of celebrated Protestant heroes. The burnings became public displays not of state power, but of Protestant courage. Eyewitness accounts talk of victims singing psalms in the flames and forgiving their executioners. Instead of convincing people that Protestantism was evil, the cruelty of the punishments convinced many that the regime imposing them must be the evil one. It was a public relations disaster of biblical proportions, solidifying a deep-seated anti-Catholic sentiment in England that would last for centuries. It's easy to see Mary as a one-dimensional monster, but her perspective is key. This was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, cast aside by her father. She was declared a bastard and separated from her mother. She saw her own faith suppressed and was pressured to renounce it under her brother's reign. She genuinely, fervently believed that she was a divine instrument chosen by God to save her country from the soul-destroying poison of heresy. In her mind, a few hundred burned bodies on earth was a small price to pay for saving millions of souls from eternal hellfire. A terrible, sincere conviction. It's the conviction that's always the most dangerous part. In November 1558, after a reign of only 5 years and 4 months, Mary I died. She was 42, childless, and likely suffering from uterine cancer. Her phantom pregnancies had been a source of national hope and then ridicule. Her husband, Philip of Spain, had already left her. Upon her death, the throne passed peacefully to her half-sister, Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth. Within months, Elizabeth's government began reversing all of Mary's Catholic policies. The exiles streamed home, more radical than ever. All the burnings, all the laws, all the terror accomplished absolutely nothing. It was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. A truly spectacular, historically significant failure. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!